Yes, good evening, or good afternoon, whatever time it is we're here at. We're going to go ahead and take a look at this next couple of chapters. I want to take the opportunity to remind you that you're about 10 days out from posting your major project. That is the comparison between the two countries. So that's due a week from Friday. I want to make sure everybody's kind of working on that. So we gotta kind of finish up strong here, because as your project is being turned in, the final will be opening up. So we're rapidly heading down the last part of this as we are in week 6 now. So I'm going to take a look at, as we're going to talk a little bit about chapters 12 and 13, international marketing and the supply chain. So we're going to just go through this and take a look at, as we go through this, and looking at what we're looking at as far as marketing and markets and how we approach the global supply chain. So as we go, we tend to look at these. We're going to define a couple of terms here, and the first one is market potential. So the market potential is that any of the companies, or all the companies, excuse me, that are in the market, how many units can be sold by all those companies in any specific market. So if we take, for instance, bags of chips, and there are how many chip companies out there, and we take a particular market. In this case, we'll be looking at a specific an international market, say in Rome, Italy, and how many bags of chips could the market hold in basically in Rome, Italy. Now, the sales potential is where we talk about the percentage of that market that you can get if you're XYZ chip company. So whatever percentage of the market you think you're going to be able to corner, okay, that's the sales potential. Whereas the market potential is that's the grand total of it all, the grand total of the scheme. So we have 3 different kinds of markets, and this kind of goes whether this is domestic or international. So what we have is consumer markets, industrial markets, and government markets. So what you have is consumer markets are everything that you and I buy. Okay, we're out there kind of consuming, whether that's credit, whether that's from a bank, whether it's checking and banking services, financial services from an institution, entertainment, transportation, the food we eat, the clothes we wear, the fuel we put in our cars, the cars we buy. All of those are consumer markets. Okay, they're what we as the end consumer are looking at. We're a particular market. Now, the industrial market is when we look at everything that industry buys. Okay, it's everything from the janitor's services these days that most places outsource, marketing research, which is all outsourced, raw materials to make supplies with, equipment, machinery, everything to run that machinery. That's all considered in the lump bucket of the industrial market. Now, the government market is all those things that the government buys. Okay, in our cases, things like roads, bridges, dams, airports, some telecommunications in our country. Not all of them are, all communications are there. The other one is things like clean water, healthcare. The military is a huge buyer of goods. Healthcare services, if you're looking at Medicaid, Medicare, and the government market kind of reinforces some of the consumer markets as well when we look at things like Medicaid. Excuse me there. This is so what we have here is all of our markets put together. So when we're looking at this and we're starting to look at when we look at going into a market, no different than what you would have been starting in marketing here in this country. It's the only difference is we kind of look at a couple of other things a little bit more closely than we would in the domestic market. We'd look at a population, no different than we would look at the population here in the US of a city or a state or whatever kind of market we were looking to go into. We'd also be looking at the income levels, the GDP of the area. In this case, we'd be looking at it as a nation. If we're looking at how much purchasing power does that nation hold? And we would do the same thing locally here. So comparison of average of the 20 wealthiest percent and to the lowest 20%. Again, that's a ratio that you would be doing if you were marketing in the US. Then we have the age of the nation's population, or the young or the old. Analyze that aspect of it. The ethnicity and religions, okay, which is probably, we'd spend a little more time looking at that than we would in the US, because the US areas typically religion and ethnicity are not as significant a demographic factor in marketing. It is in some small isolated areas, but not really a large capacity in the US, where this one here would definitely play an important role as we went into many of the international markets. The last one would be the market, whether our market is rural or urban. So when we take a look at marketing research versus marketing intelligence, okay? So marketing research is a snapshot, typically. It's marketing research that you're collecting. It may be a questionnaire, it might be some kind of survey, or it may be looking at sales over a particular period of time. But it's a snapshot over a very finite set of time. Whereas market intelligence is what we're talking about when we talk about long-term. This is what happens over the long haul, and it's continually collected. So it's continually updating. It's important for us to do that as marketers, because obviously we are looking for and really want this information on an international basis, even more so than you do in the US. And that's because, you know, markets abroad can change drastically or rather quickly over time, and we want to know those trends as quickly as possible. So we look at the standardization and adaptation, okay? So this is where we take a look at strategies on how we're going to work in these markets, okay? So the first one we're going to look at is standardization, okay? So some things that we do in the US and some marketing strategies, as well as products in the US, will work abroad, you know. For instance, Pepsi is Pepsi and Coke is Coke, no matter where you go in the world. So the marketing is pretty much the same for those types of products. So there's not a huge strategy difference. There is a little bit of product difference and a little bit but as far as the strategy to get to those markets, it's pretty standard in the soda and beer industries. You know, beverage industry as a whole actually is pretty standard, whether you're talking domestic or international. Whereas the other hand, adaptation is where we're taking strategies used in international markets that are different than what we have in the US. So we're approaching things a little differently than we do in the US. For instance, the marketing of hotels abroad is going to be different than it is in the US. You know, here we market more on price. There we're marketing on a vacation aspect, because most everybody takes, a lot of those European countries, for instance, take substantial amounts of time off in the summertime. A lot of industries kind of slow down if you look at it globally. So the approach of when and where to market would be adapted for hotels and those types of institutions in Europe, for instance. And then glocalization. Okay, now that is not a misspelled term, that is localization, where the marketing strategy you're pursuing basically is a standardized strategy. It's kind of the hybrid. That's the way you look at localization. Okay, it is global. So when it makes sense, you standardize it with what you're running in the US. And when it doesn't make sense, you change it to something else that will work for a particular market. So, when you're looking at this abroad, it depends on your product, depends on what you're trying to market and what your timeframes are. So product mixes, when we look abroad, okay, they got kind of the same type of decision as how we would market that. So take a look at, we could basically do the same thing, sell the same product. We might modify a product slightly in different regions, in different countries. Go back to my Coke example there, okay? The product changes in those different regions, and because their taste profiles are different than the US. The US products contain a lot more sugar than they do abroad. For instance, diet products are like Diet Coke or Diet Pepsi aren't allowed in some of those countries anyway because of the type of product and how they're made. So you would have to go to a zero, like Coke Zero or something like that. It's actually where Coke Zero originally came from. It was the product that was modified for Europe because they couldn't sell Diet Coke over there. Or you make a whole new product for the foreign market. And sometimes you kind of do this hybrid aspect where you incorporate product differences into one design and develop a global product that's going to be suitable for most of the world markets. For instance, air travel for most of the world is a pretty standardized product, which they kind of incorporate all the differences of different kinds of products into the excuse me into that one airline product. Now there are a couple of airlines that don't subscribe to that. Air Korea, for instance, or Korean Air is one. Qatar Air is another. A couple of them have much more different approach to the way they do it. But for the most part, airline travel is definitely one global market. Developing new products for international markets. Okay, so when we look at this, and we're looking at this aspect of developing a new product, first you got to brainstorm and take a look at what product ideas might work in there, and then see if it can be actually produced over there. Do some concept testing, which is basically making some small run of the product, kind of run it out in a market and see how quickly it sells to gauge. That's how you gauge the reaction. You do a business analysis. Basically, what's it going to cost to produce? What's it going to, what are your costs, your hard costs, your fixed costs? What are the revenue projections are? Just like the Shark Tank there, what I want to know, that business analyst step, where what's your projected revenue? What did you do in the concept testing? And what's the profit potential or the return on investment, ROI? So developing the physical product, then your product design, and then basically you're basically going to develop that. Then you do market testing, which is a bigger aspect of it than it's a bigger. So you're testing it in a whole market, typically, which is a much larger segment. If you compare, the concept testing would be something along the lines of comparing, maybe concept testing would be done maybe in something the size of Gaffney. Whereas market testing, we'd move into something like a place like Charlotte or Atlanta. And then we could, with those broad-based people, could actually develop a market, that market testing to see if it will make a run. And then you basically produce the product. Okay, very similar to what you do in the US. Okay, but here you're going to really pay attention to the business, this aspect of the business analysis, the product design, and then the testing. The market testing, especially, to ensure that this is going to be a viable product for whatever market you're looking to go into. Okay, so basically, when you're looking at asking yourself if you're going to be able to produce this, and are you going to have, and if you're going to be able to produce this, and how quickly can you make money at it? So when you take a look at this, you're looking at your competitiveness as you go along. So is there an advantage to this product that you're rolling out? Okay, if there's an advantage, if you've got a high advantage, then there's probably going to be a rapid rate of adoption. Okay, If there's low advantage and there's a lot of competitors, okay, then you can will be over here in this aspect of adoption. It's going to be harder to break into it. Compatibility, okay, is the compatibility consistent with something they have there or with the market that you've identified with? So that would increase the rate of adoption. Inconsistent with that would be a lower rate of adoption. How complex is the product? Is it simple or is it difficult? Triability, you can, you can do it, you can't do it. Okay, so if it's the ability to be able to translate and be able to, the ability to move between different types of markets and individuals, then you would have a higher rate of adoption. Over here, if it doesn't, obviously the opposite is true. Communicatability. In other words, can you communicate what that product is? Okay, can you easily script the message for it? If that's the case, then it probably is going to be over here. And then is it low cost or high cost? So the more that you have over here in these questions that you're asking, okay, the more the score is over here, the more likely that product's going to be successful. The more you lean towards this way, so both the low rate and the low level of adoption, then you might ask yourself, is this the product you really want to go with? Okay. Now here's a big issue, intellectual property. They do say that the aspect of being counterfeited is so copying somebody else's design is the greatest form of flattery. It's also the greatest form of lost revenue, okay? Because counterfeiting really cuts into your product in a number of ways. So intellectual property, when you start ripping off a brand and making a lower quality product, okay, then what you can do is you damage that brand image. If somebody buys that who doesn't know that they're buying a counterfeit good. Now, a lot of times you do buy, especially if you go to China, you're buying counterfeit goods. But it may, that brand is going to be damaged by those because they may not hold up as long. They may not look as good for as long. So there is definitely those inferior counterfeits are definitely something to be concerned with. Sales revenues, obviously you lost a potential sale. Okay. Dangers to customers from hazard and defective products. So if you're buying something that's such as a baby stroller, okay, that is definitely a counterfeited item, there might be some hazardous items in there. They might not take all the extra steps to make sure all the sharp edges are covered and those types of things. Or the cost of combating, and you really have the cost of combating counterfeit products. Definitely the case in electronics and consumer goods, clothing, those types of things, handbags, shoes, all the big designers who produce in China and overseas, mainly in China, but in overseas and other issues do run the risk of having their goods counterfeited and produced at a lower level quality. So when you're looking at promotion from a global perspective, you're looking at the development of an international product mix. Okay, so you have publicity, advertising, sales promotion, and personal selling. Okay, so how are you going to mix these up to get your message across and be able to promote your product? Advertising and sales promotion. Sales promotions are things like, are you going to discount to begin with? Are you going to move around goods around? Do you do 2-for-1s? Do you sell the price for at 20% off to get them in the door? There's all sorts of those are promotions. Advertising is just exactly that, is what kind of advertising medium is going to reach your audience. And publicity is going to be things that you're doing out there to really reel in the public and bring identification to your brand. The last one is personal selling. Okay, so how many people out there are you going to get to produce your product? So when we look at our next round here, since my slide moves. There we go. Is these aspects of channels of distribution. So how are you going to get your product to market? Okay. So what we've got here is the indirect strategy, okay, which basically says that you're going to use existing distribution channels that are already there. So, you're going to go ahead and send them over to a distributor over there. The distributor is going to put them in with the rest of their products to sell, and you're going to move them out. Basically, this gives you almost no risk. It does, because it requires no upfront investment. The distributor is going to have some market knowledge. They can get your products in quickly. But on the other side, the channels are going to, they may also carry competing products, and the actual person, the distributor, is going to actually control the marketing efforts of those. So, there's some good and bad to the indirect strategy. Now, the direct strategy, basically, you're going to actually go set up yourself. You're going to set up shop in a foreign country but yourself and get them out to do that. Now, you're going to have to put in some investment there, because you're going to have to train that workforce and have to get them up and going. And you're going to have to maintain, but you can maintain controlling over your marketing efforts, so you control everything and direct it the way you want it to. It can happen, may not be quite as clean as you'd like. It might not be. The first strategy, indirect, is not going to be as clean as you'd like it, because you're not controlling it. On the second part, you're going to really be able to control the rest of that. Okay. So you've got kind of a couple of different kinds of indirect ones that you can look at. The first one is an agent, which basically is that you're an agent. You hire yourself an agent in that country to basically push forward your agenda. And typically they get paid by, just like any other sales guy, they get paid by commission. So however much they sell is how much the more money they make. Now, a distributor is a channel where that distributor is going to buy goods from you, and then resell them to another buyer. Okay, so there you're getting paid for your product up front, but you're losing the control of how your product is being marketed when you go to actually into that distributor model. Now, physical distribution basically is the storage and operation aspect of this. So if you did this by yourself, you would be marketing the distribution channel. So you would become your own warehouse, your own shipping. You'd bring it into the warehouse, you'd ship it back out, and you push the marketing. Now, distribution issues when you come over there, you may not be able to have actual distribution, access to networks, being out of the country. Also, in some countries, there's not a lot of logistical infrastructure. There's not a lot of shipping firms, and the security in those areas are a little harder to be able to deliver. So sometimes you'll have trucks that'll get hijacked or whatever. Those are all things that play into the distribution aspect of your goods. So you may want to maintain control of that. You may not. You're going to have to really make those decisions as you go along. So basically, the other aspect of this is companies selling products overseas use freight forwarders. Okay, so these are agents that become involved in the physical distribution of activities and documentation. So there's a lot of times where I know several who do things like importing wine. So what they are a freight forwarder. So what they do is freight forwarders typically will take the possession of the goods in the foreign country and ensure they get to their destination in their other country, and then basically they're reselling them or ensure that their products get through customs and the rest of that. So a freight forwarder is a person who's basically going to make sure that the product gets from one country to another. Now, containerization is where you put things into. Everybody's seen those trucks running down the road of tractor trailers. And these are usually the short ones that have the heavier steel construction. And if you've been to any port, you'll see those containers stacked up, all up and down, because they're designed to be stacked together. So what you will do is they will take those containers by truck, train, plane, or ship. But they will actually pack those together with goods, and depending on the weight, they'll actually of the container is how full that container gets, because they ensure that that container can be transported once it gets to its destination. In the U.S., we have some pretty severe weight limits on trucks. So whatever's in that container, they don't want it to be opened until it gets to its final destination. So they make sure it is definitely weighed in order. Intermodal transport is typically what most things pass through. If you're looking at the U.S., goods are loaded into containers to ships. The ships pull into a port. The port then those goods are offloaded at the port and inspected by Customs and Immigration, and then loaded onto maybe a train to go a little bit further. And then finally they get to the destination then they're put on a truck to get the final distance all around. That's usually how most of the travel goes. Now, if you need it in a hurry, there is air transportation, but it is pretty costly. But then again, you're trucking it to the airport, then you're putting it on a plane, then it comes off, gets on a truck again, and then moves accordingly. So that's what they call intermodal transport, or the mode of goods transfers between different kinds. So when you're looking for pricing objectives here, you're looking at these aspects, these objectives, okay? Basically performance, prevention, and maintenance, okay? So basically we'll start out with the performance. You're looking at what you need to make money, okay? Net profit, return on investment, which are market share and market penetration. Those are all performance objectives. Now you also want to do you may have some preventive objectives that you're looking at. You may want to inhibit competition, and you may want to deter government scrutiny. So if you charge too much for a good, you might get some government oversight there, or you might price yourself out of the competition. So, or you drop the ball, you low ball to get into a market, and you knock out the competition. Just depends on what your objectives are. The maintenance objectives typically are maintaining competitive parity. So you want to make sure that you're competitive with the rest of the players in the market. And you also want to maintain good dealer relations. So if you kind of go into the objectives up above of prevention, you might run into issues with other dealers and not be able to move your products. So in the end, you want to survive. So however you mix these up, you want to make sure that you're in business in the end. Okay. So transfer pricing is prices that are charged, it's overseas subsidiaries to sell them products that they will resell. So if you're bringing products in from the US to overseas, then you want to make sure that so basically you want to make sure that they can be resold when you get there. Okay. A lot of times this is used if you actually own the company themselves. So a lot of times you'll charge the cost right at cost or below cost to get those goods over there. And then you make your money on the other side, on the transfer side. So on a transfer, you're looking at goods coming from the US to another country, and you want to keep that as low as possible, because then it minimizes the taxes of you coming in to the country, because that typically is based on value. Now, arm's length price is when a price is willing to pay to get customarily paid to be transferred products into the overseas market. So that's when they come over here and buy the product and then take care of the shipping to get over there. A couple of different kinds of ways. One, transfer price is typically on where you maintain possession of the goods till it gets there. The arm's length price is where they come over here, buy the goods, and then ship them back. Depends on how you want to look at things. So when we move into this aspect now of the supply chain, so the marketing aspect kind of led us into the supply chain. Now we're really getting into the supply chain. So global operations, when we look at things, we look at things in 3 different systems. The first one is production. Okay, you make cabinets, you sell cabinets. Okay, so you bring raw materials in for the cabinet, you make the cabinet, and then you ship it back out and sell it. Manufacturing is where which goods dominate the value of the product. So that cabinet, for instance, is also part of the manufacturing system. Okay, and because the raw materials that determine the value of the product. So the cost of your wood, the cost of glass, the cost of all the hardware, that determines the value, the bulk of the product. Just like in my business from before, basically, in food, it's the cost of your food and the cost of your labor. Those are the 2 things that they dominate the aspect. So in essence, food is still a manufactured system. Now, especially if you're looking at fast food, if you're looking at a service system, whereas the production system, which the services dominate the value of the product. So financial products, that's a service. So typically in that system, the cost of the service dictates how much they have to charge for the product to make money. For instance, if you are in fine dining, so that aspect is, or a hotel room, the production really system is the services dictate of how much that room is going to cost. So if you're staying in the Hampton Inn, that's one level of service. If you're staying in the JW Marriott or the Renaissance Hotel in downtown Charlotte, okay, then the level of service is different. So that's going to dominate the value of the product. So a production model, pretty much, this is a linear supply, and this works the same way whether you're looking at the supply chain, whether you're looking at it globally or domestically. So you have suppliers that supply you basically supplies. So back to my cabinet example, you've got wood, you've got glass, you've got hardware. Okay, yeah, all those people are supplying that to you. Those are your inputs. Okay, those inputs come in, they come to the production process, then you have output, which is your final product, and then it goes to the customers. Now, how the product gets to that aspect really depends on the product system transformation. So basically, you're looking at this aspect of a circular motion in this diagram here. So what we're looking at here is the transformation process. So the production is, you have a physical aspect to this now, which is a physical plant in a place where you're going to produce those cabinets. Okay. Now you may decide that you want to locate those facilities to make those cabinets near where your wood source is. So then it kind of goes to the locational. So you've got your product, you know what you're going to be making. Then you're going to decide where you want to locate that production facility. For instance, here in the local Gaffney area, there was a lot of mills because there was a lot of cotton production. So they located those clothing producers here locally, basically because that they could have the availability of raw product. Okay. Now, when you get into these other aspects, you look at informational, psychological, physiological. These 3 categories are more about the how the company's is actually positioned in a particular location. Okay. And how that product is perceived in that location. So this has become more and more important over the years, especially now, because it's all about the position. Okay. So all of these are the physiological, the informational, the psychological phases of this is how you fit into that local area. You may want to locate near where the wood is, but maybe they don't want you where the wood is. Okay, so that's a psychological barrier there. Or, or they don't want to, or you may have to deal with the sawdust issue, and because they don't want sawdust being released into the air. Okay, that's the physiological aspect of the process. And then you kind of work out the exchange phase is where you actually figure out how you're going to actually exchange these goods in the end. So are you going to produce them and then box them up and ship them somewhere for somebody else to deal with? Or are you going to store them? Are you going to maintain an inventory of those cabinets? And then if you do, then you're going to have to maintain an aspect of a warehouse. Whereas a lot of cabinet makers may just move it out and exchange them. As soon as they're produced, they're moved out to they're moved into the supply chain, the next phase of the supply chain, and they're pushed out. So you just kind of have to look at, in all of these, with this big wheel, you're constantly figuring out when you're starting to locate where you want to put operations. These are all things you have to consider through the steps. Okay, so from an operations perspective, you have domestic and global. Your domestic operations are typically, those are in the host country, where you actually basically everything's done in one country. Global means that you're pulling in products from all over the different places. Okay. Then you get into procurement. Okay. So when you get into procurement, we look at basically 3 different things. Okay. Make or buy. Okay. This was always a big one for me in my industry. Do I make it or do I buy it? Okay. So do I buy the raw materials and make it, or do I buy a finished product and move it out? So that depends on a number of factors. For me, it was labor, time, quality, and who was the end user, which are all the same in no matter what your decisions are. So global procurement would be, back to my cabinet example, I'm going to import wood from Nigeria because it's cheaper and it's a better quality product. Okay. Now the global production means that I could produce, like in the car industry, they produce things in Mexico and in China and other areas and bringing them to the US, and then we assemble here. So the global production aspect means you're producing everything somewhere else and then actually bringing those parts in to assemble probably here. Whereas the procurement part of that is you're buying the raw materials. Okay, so now when we look at these things, we're looking at the advantages of doing this globally. A lot of times you don't have to invest if you're procuring from above the world. You don't have to worry about investing money into making it. There's no labor involved. It's all been priced into your product that you're buying. The focus is on the final stages of production, which means where you can add the most value to your money. Also gives you a lot of flexibility. A lot of your purchase costs are going to be lower because of economies of scale. For instance, there's a lot of companies that make the same, Japanese car companies, for instance, are big on the economies of scale. A lot of them use the same engine. It doesn't matter where you're Toyota, Mazda, Subaru, any of those, they all pretty much, a lot of them have the same engines in them. A lot of them have the same doorknobs in them. A lot of them have the same lights in them and speakers and all those, because they're computers. Chips is the big issue now, computer chips, because they have one company that actually produces those for all those cars. Buying firm doesn't need to learn, they don't need to learn a new business. So you're not having to worry about figuring out how to make those things. And you get it simplifies your production process. So there is a lot of advantages to global procurement. The disadvantages is, as we can see with the chip makers, you're relying on suppliers on a part that you need to get. And if you don't get the product, everything's on hold, just like trying to buy a new car these days. Everything's on hold because those products are being made. All those car manufacturers, domestic and foreign, use the same chips that are made from Japan, and they are not making them as quickly as possible. Also, you run into problems enforcing contracts. You may be competing against other competitors. And again, in this chip process, they're all competing for those chips, those computer chips. Profits on producing goods and services will go to the suppliers. That's usually a small part these days. Buying power, use the suppliers, the industry, could create a scarcity of those components as we see in the car industry. And basically those are, all of these are disadvantages of global procurement, although most of the time these days we have been weighing more towards the advantages. Okay, outsourcing and insourcing, okay? Outsourcing is when you're basically goods and services that were made in-house, you decide to move them out of house. So a lot of places now, their customer service is outsourced, and it's outsourced to South America or India because that's where it can be done cheaply. Domestic, it's very expensive to run domestically, so they like to move that outward. Domestic outsourcing is when a lot of times their goods and services are located in the same country. So, for instance, you outsource your maintenance and you outsource your janitorial services. Usually those are local companies, companies that are located within the domestic environment, which are outsourcing that because you're not doing that. They're not your employees, they're somebody else's employees. And the global outsourcing is the example I used in the services for instance, customer service, accounting, finance. A lot of those are offshore because they're labor intensive, and our labor costs here domestically are pretty high. The insourcing is one of those where they decide to make everything in-house. Locally now, or some industries are going back to insourcing because they can maintain the quality but much better than they do outsourced, because those you're making it with your own employees. Okay, so advantages of making, everything stays with you. Okay, so that's really the big. That's in a nutshell. All these are all things that are set out because you control it. You want to maintain that control. And there are some reasons that you may want to contain that control. You may have a high quality product. You may not want to give that out. So those are the advantages. The disadvantages, obviously, are those that you're tied to another manufacturer. Okay. Whereas you may decide dual sourcing may be an option where you have a couple of different a couple of different internal suppliers inside domestically that are competing for your business, and they're so if they're competing with their business, there's not really any improvement there to keep your business. Depends on who you talk to, but there's in-house processing may increase. If you're bringing goods in, it might increase the possibility of production. Maybe a difficult thing because parts may not be quite the way you wanted to. They may not fit the way you think they should. And the disadvantages of that, you incur both fixed and variable costs if you make them. And whereas typically the firm only incurs the variable costs if you're actually buying them and bringing them in. So where do you locate your business to produce? And this is where you kind of have to go back and forth. You play back and forth. You figure out what's going to be the best interest for your company. Okay. Do you want to be close to your consumer? Do you want to be close to your supply? Do you want to be close to being able to be shipped out somewhere? Obviously, or do you want to go where the labor is the cheapest? Okay, these are all aspects of where you locate your facilities. Okay, and then when we look at here is supply chain. Okay, and this kind of talks about how you're managing the total cost of the supply chain, and how those goods get to go back and forth. So when you look at this diagram here, okay, so basically the supply chain is where it starts here with your suppliers. They're bringing goods to you to make. Then you're going back out to the distributors. Then they go to retailers. Then they go to customers. Okay. So how you manage this, all your inputs, determines how much your cost of your outputs are, which is ultimately going to cost your consumer. You know, some companies will take out this step and go right to the retailer, obviously with online purchasing. You know, others will choose one distributor for online, for instance, Amazon, and others will choose also a distributor to go into hardline stores or mainline stores, which may be a different price point. Okay, so what you're doing is managing this whole chain, which is from your supplier to your customer. And you really need to kind of look at how and where your costs are, how much you can get. So you're actually managing this whole aspect of it. Now you have a few tools to do that. Computers are a wonderful thing, especially in managing the global supply chain. They can tell you where things are, what they're going to cost, and just what level you're looking at will actually depend on how you do this. Now, these enterprise resource planning systems, they actually track everything from your goods from start to finish. They're really great. They're a little expensive, but they're really great because you can actually pull different levels in, as you can see here from our last diagram, which is basically all these operation modules are out there. So basically they will pull everything, the data in from the suppliers into the operations aspect of this. They'll add in the finance, the accounting, the marketing, and the human resources all come into this database. So they can constantly tell you in real time what your goods are going to cost you. All right, I kind of ran a little long today, but it's close to an hour, but not too bad anyway. Hopefully everybody has, I didn't run this through too quickly, and that you guys can manage to help manage that in the future. I'll go ahead and finish up now so we can, and I will probably check in with you guys one more time next week with one last video.